Hi, I'm Drew Levanti, and welcome back to Elections Weekly, a show where we journey through the week ahead with electional astrology. This is the fourth video in an ongoing series on electional astrology. The support so far has been tremendous. Thank you so much for all of the likes, comments, and subscriptions, and please keep them coming because they really help grow the viewership of these videos. Before diving into the charts for this week, we're going to look at some successes from last week. And before we take a look at some successes from last week, I just wanted to share a funny planetary magic story, which is that because Mercury is retrograde and because it's a balsamic moon, which is usually like a low energy time right now, as I'm recording this, as I'm editing this, I need a lot of Mercury help and I need a lot of air help. I need a lot of help with generating ideas and articulating myself. And so I am focusing on Mercury remediation today. And that's happened in a couple ways. First of all, I have this stone, which was, it's multicolored. Many of you will probably know what this is, but I literally cannot remember the name of it. But all I know is that it is multicolored. And because it's multicolored, it's of Mercury. Mercury is basically any stone that has multiple colors in it. Even if that stone is also connected with another planet, it will also be connected with Mercury because of its multicoloredness. And so I'm sitting here with this stone. I'm like spraying myself with lavender hydrosol, and I am just focusing on Mercury, right? And then I hear outside there's somebody saying like Drew Levanti. And so I look outside and it's somebody delivering me a package. It's like an Amazon delivery person, a mailman. And mail is literally like the most Mercury thing ever. It's like messages and deliveries and all of this kind of, moves between people and places and things and ideas. So I'm sitting right by the window, like that's over my door where people usually leave packages, but I don't honestly know how they get in there. I'm like in a second floor Chicago apartment on like just a 3-unit building. And so I open up the window and I have this like really pleasant interaction with the mailman because I'm like, Drew, I'm like, is that for Drew? And he's like, yeah, I left it in the secure package room. I was like, cool. It was such a Jupiterian experience of Mercury too. And I think that's a really cool thing to tap into Jupiter, like mixed with anything, just makes it work better. And Jupiter also makes things more friendly. Like I'm literally like shouting down. And so I just thought that was super funny. So magic works. All right, now let's look at last week's elections and how they went for people. The election we're highlighting from last week is the Thursday election, a Sagittarius moon election in the 10th house with a Pisces rising and Jupiter in Pisces. This election became important for Shahir, a graduate student in human rights policy living in New York. Shahir used the election to publicly ask for financial support for a trip that they've been dreaming of. Shahir works as an astrologer and tarot reader to support their livelihood in New York as a graduate student. Using the timing of this election, Shahir started a campaign to help finance the trip. On this trip, they and other graduate students will be going to Palestine, and they will be meeting with Israeli and Palestinian human rights advocates, business owners, and community leaders. They will see the West Bank Wall and checkpoints, and they will visit heritage and religious sites. As of the time of this recording, Shahir's trip is currently 70% funded. And if you'd like to help, check out the link in the video description. Now, this election is incredibly descriptive of Shahir's venture and efforts. It features an incredible emphasis on Jupiter. Jupiter is rising and the moon is in a Jupiter-ruled sign, and its next aspect is to Jupiter. All of this focus on Jupiter points to travel, learning, and religion as key themes in the venture. The moon's placement in the 10th sign and in the 9th house highlights the overlap of 9th and 10th house themes. Shahir going abroad as part of a program for graduate students situates us in the 9th house, but this election is also part of Shahir's professional efforts and goals, which we can understand through the moon's placement in the 10th sign. And so we see that the advancement of both 9th and 10th house things is represented by this moon. Once again, you can help Shahir get their trip fully funded at the link in the video description. And so you'll often hear me say the 10th sign and the 9th house. And when I say that, I'm talking about this thing that happens when there's a discrepancy between the two. And sometimes that discrepancy becomes very meaningful. My default framework in how I think about a chart is in whole sign houses. And when I read charts, I put them in a layout that is Regiomontanus houses so that I can see a little bit more nuance by seeing where certain house cusps fall. And sometimes the house cusp can become particularly activated with a planet being very close to it. So it's just an extra layer of information, while I do understand the main topical descriptions of any chart through the whole sign system in here. And I really like to teach this geometric understanding of the zodiac, where you understand how modality and triplicity are essentially house-based relationships. I'll talk about this more at some point, but I want to get into the elections. Our first chart of the week is Tuesday, February 1st at 9:40 a.m. It's an Aries rising, and Mars is in Capricorn in the 10th sign, very close to the midheaven. Venus is conjunct Mars as the ruler of the 7th house, also placed in the 10th. Jupiter is in Pisces in the 12th house, and Mars is applying to a sextile with it. So here we have Mars in contact with two benefics, and one of those benefics is placed in the 12th house, while the other one is the ruler of the 7th. And so there's a connection of 1st, 7th, and 12th house themes. As is a theme with many charts this week, and even this month, there's a focus on the activation and resolution of relational dramas, passionate exertions, creativity, eros, and the eruption of the past. The presence of Mars and Venus in the 10th house could relate this to career, but also the 10th house is the part of the chart that describes the present action. If the first house represents the idea of the thing, then the 10th house represents the practice of the thing. So you can have an idea of what you're doing, and then you can also have the way that you go about that idea. And the way that you go about that idea and the way that you go about this action is described by planets in the 10th house. And when the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 7th are in the 10th house, it shows very clearly that these two parties are interacting dynamically and productively. There is a lot going on. A lot is changing due to what is happening in this moment. We also see that the ruler of the 10th is under the beams of the sun and combust. The moon is also conjunct the ruler of the 10th, this Saturn in Aquarius. So we might say that the support that is offered for the 10th house, for this present activity, for this practice, these resources are being changed, are being reformed, reborn. This is a new moon conjunct Saturn. So this is very much the beginning of a process. This is a very interesting chart for business. Jupiter as this benefic in the 12th house is interesting because it is connected to Mars and Venus, who are the main players in the chart. This Jupiter could represent psychic restoration, the benefits of retreat. It could also represent hidden helpers. Mercury is about to station direct in the 10th house, furthering this theme of a change in direction or certain resolutions that have to be made. The languaging of this 10th house, of this present activity, is not yet fully formed. The nature of the commerce or the exchange, insofar as it is described in words, is still in question. On February 2nd, Wednesday, we have a chart at 1:47 p.m. The moon is conjoining Jupiter in Pisces on the midheaven. This conjunction is configured by sextile to the conjunction of Venus and Mars in the 7th house. This is a beautiful first bud. The moon is waxing. It's still a fingernail, you know, and it's going to be conjoining Jupiter. So just think about what that looks like. Just imagine like that kind of newness and that faintness of light that is so full of hope. You really want to be careful with when you put Mars in the 7th house, especially in a day chart. But notice how well aspected this Mars is. It's conjunct Venus, it's sextile to Jupiter, applying. This is essentially as well-mannered as Mars can be and as harmless. It is describing something that's happening with a partner or a potential partner, the person who you're dealing with. You'll notice that when I'm talking about elections, I'm so often talking about relationships because there are so few things that do not directly involve relationships. The descendant is opposite the ascendant, and this opposition is, I think, undervalued as an angle. I love the work of Palace at nineofwands.com, who is writing a book on the IC, the angle at the bottom of the chart. And it's been wonderful to see Palace bring light to this dark place that we often don't pay a lot of attention to in the ranking of the angles, the 4 angles, and how important they are. The descendant is also so key in everything we do. We can also think about the descendant as the midlife of something. If the IC is death and the dead, then the descendant can be the waning years. Mercury is retrograde in the 7th, but it's about to move forward. The end of a retrograde signifies an important change in direction in something, and often changes in direction can actually be really useful. We don't expect things to go smoothly, but we do expect them to be important in moving us somewhere that we want to go. This chart is great for astrology and other forms of prediction, being prophetic. If you want to channel a message, you can consider using this time. This also happens to be the hour of the moon on Wednesday. So on Mercury's day, in the hour of the moon, when the moon rules the ascendant in the 9th. So there is a sense of somehow accessing God, a perspective on the immensity of all things, coming to terms as Mercury stations direct, experimenting with language, being direct and innovative. The sun is conjunct Saturn in the 8th, which could represent some sense in which people feel beholden to each other, some way in which shared doubt, shared skepticism binds people together. There is a focus on binding with the moon being conjunct Jupiter in a wet sign, the ascendant in a water sign. This is great for anything to do with water, healing water, advocating for water. What are problems in the hydrosphere that need solving? What can it do if we think of our concepts and our ideologies as soluble? What happens when they dissolve? What possibilities are opened by that dissolution? Our chart for Thursday, February 3rd, is at 7:50 in the morning. This is similar to last Thursday's chart when the moon was in Sagittarius, the election that Shahir used, except instead of the moon being in Sag, now it's in Pisces conjunct Jupiter. And so we're still in the moon-Jupiter conjunction, except now there's less emphasis on the ascendant ruler being filled with Jupiter and more emphasis on the ascendant ruler sharing Jupiter, being Jupiter, embodying Jupiter, and distributing it to others. And the reason I'm focusing on this distribution is because the moon is separating from Jupiter and moving to different planets around the chart. The moon has already completed aspects to Venus and Mars, and now it's moving into a sextile with Mercury retrograde in the 11th house. And this Mercury rules the 7th. So again, this is a chart where Mercury and Jupiter are interacting in a supportive way, and there's an opportunity for them to come together, and the moon is facilitating this connection. This could look like delivering good news to somebody, or sharing a piece of wisdom or learning that you've had recently. If you've had complicated dealings with somebody recently, then this is a good chart for making amends or coming to an understanding together in an emotionally sensitive and receptive way. With the phase of the moon being waxing, gaining light ever so gently, maybe what's being communicated is a hope that we can agree collaboratively. In terms of collaboration, we also see that the ruler of the 8th house is recently stationed direct, so talking about Venus. So collaboration is moving forward again, and it might still be uncomfortable with the presence of Mars. This discomfort is a constructive discomfort. We can move through this discomfort in order to make our collaboration happen. This could very well be an important alliance as we see all of these planets in the 11th house. Because the ruler of the 11th is in the 12th, we might be recovering from a sense of distrust about this alliance. And what this first house is doing is expressing good faith that we hope we can work it out. Our Friday chart for the 4th of February is about 9:25 p.m. It's a Libra rising. Venus is in the 4th house in Capricorn, close to the IC, still with Mars. And the moon is in the 7th house, conjunct the descendant, moving into an aspect with both Venus and Mars. Mercury is also in the 4th house, recently having stationed direct. Now, the 4th house, where there is so much emphasis in the chart, often describes a sense of secrecy or things being hidden. With the moon in the 7th house connecting with these 4th house planets, it's as if more light, a waxing moon, is being shown on these hidden things. Secrets are coming to light. With Mercury having stationed direct, this also points us to a turning point in a dialogue. With Mercury in this position, also ruling the 9th house, this could have something to do with moving forward with astrology, moving forward with prediction, or also law is another 9th house topic. So if there is some kind of estate law or litigation that must be done around estates, this would be an interesting chart to kind of feed into that process. I know that oftentimes the 8th house is seen as inheritances, but the 4th house also has a sense of fixed resources that are property. I often describe capital as a fourth house topic. So this is a chart that could activate that topic or interact with the role of that topic in a person's life, even if somebody does not have access to capital. Another thing that might be involved is creative restriction, as we have a night chart here with Saturn in the fifth house conjunct the sun. So one's creative potency, one's zest for life might be somehow diminished through the use of this chart or in alignment with somebody who needs to use this chart. Somebody who needs to use this chart or ends up using this chart might already be experiencing some kind of creative restriction. It could also have to do with children or sex as well. Maybe there is some kind of sexual boundary that needs to be navigated and that our attention is being drawn to by the sun. And this interpretation is strengthened by the fact that Saturn is the ruler of this Venus-Mars conjunction, you see? So the erotic quality of the Venus-Mars conjunction is being provided for by this cold Saturn in the fifth house. So this chart can only be hot to the extent that your boundaries are being attended to and that you are attending to their boundaries. Because if we look at the sun rules the 11th, which is fifth from the 7th. In other words, the sun is representing something about the sex of another person's sexual boundaries also being involved here. With Jupiter in the sixth house, trining the midheaven, there's an ability to solve problems through good faith. There's good medicine. Our Saturday chart is at 9:17 in the morning with the moon rising in the first house. The moon is separating from Venus and applying to Saturn in the 11th. With Mars ruling the ascendant conjunct the midheaven, this continues to be a chart where controversy and the working out of relational dramas is highlighted. What's really cool about this chart is this moon that's so connected to the ascendant, to the individual. This moon is connecting Venus and Mars to their ruler. It's carrying light from the Venus-Mars conjunction to Saturn through its aspect. So we could see this moon as letting Saturn know what Venus and Mars need. What Venus and Mars need to succeed in their interaction is being supported by the connection of the moon. So even though Saturn is not an aspect to the Venus-Mars conjunction that it's responsible for taking care of, the moon is helping Saturn understand what Venus and Mars are doing and what they need. So this is a decent chart for getting support from a community, building an audience, asking for support. The moon in the first house nurtures the first house. If you decide to use this chart, consider your natal Saturn and how capable your natal Saturn is of providing for you. You might use this election to clarify your own sense of what it is you need from community, what in community nurtures you. This Sun-Saturn conjunction is happening in the middle decan of Aquarius, which corresponds with the Six of Swords. So you might consider that card as a partner in contemplating this chart. Our Sunday chart is February 6th at about 11:30 p.m. Check this chart in your location and make sure that the moon is in Taurus. If it's not, you might want to consider a different rising sign. Pisces rising could be a good option the following morning if the moon is not yet in Taurus in your location. The ruler of the ascendant in this chart is Mars in Capricorn. So there's a sense in which the individual is being elevated in some way and also respected. Not only is Mars exalted, but Mars is also enclosed between benefics. So we have Mars separating from an aspect with Jupiter and applying with Venus. So Mars has, in Austin Coppock's words, supreme protection. Our interests are being protected, and protection is being offered by the seventh house, so the other party. An important part of the chronology of Venus and Mars in Capricorn is that they are kind of exchanging places. Typically, Venus is the faster planet than Mars, but because Venus has just come to a halt and is now just starting to move forward again, Mars at this point in its cycle is actually faster than Venus. There's a misalignment of expected speeds. We, as the agents undertaking this election, are moving quickly and directly and effectively. And we are communicating in these ways as well, because this conjunction is happening in the third house of communication, of messages. This is a really good chart to be applying skills and gaining new skills, as these are also things that we find in the third. Creative skills are well supported here because of this connection that Mars has to Jupiter in the fifth house of creativity. This is a really excellent chart for getting pregnant. So if you see this Jupiter in the fifth house and you think that that sounds really good for sex, make sure that you're taking precautions. We also see the moon is exalted and applying to an aspect with Jupiter, and the moon and Jupiter are the two planets that are arguably the most pro baby making. This Sun-Saturn conjunction in the fourth house speaks to the preservation of the past, illuminating memory. This could simply be a very nostalgic conversation that you have with somebody about restoring friendship. Don't sleep on friendship as a third house topic either. And also don't sleep on magic and ritual for this one. Our Monday chart is February 7th at approximately 1:18 p.m. It should have about 2 degrees of Cancer rising. Make sure that it's Cancer rising. The moon is still exalted. The moon is in the 11th, and it's contacting Jupiter and Venus and Mars again. This is a brilliant chart for alliance making. This is a brilliant chart for audience building, a brilliant chart for furthering one's reputation. This Jupiter is sitting right on the midheaven. It's a beautiful, beautiful chart. It's also the day and hour of the moon, which essentially make what the moon is doing all the more important, all the more resonant around the chart. This moon is very busy. We can see the busyness of the moon through its very close aspects to everything in the chart, essentially. All of the traditional planets are being pinged by the moon within just a few degrees. And although I'm not picturing it in this chart, the moon is also exactly conjunct Uranus at this time. So there may be an element of unpredictability, but it's an unpredictability that's going to skew in the positive direction because of the contacts of the moon. Although make sure in your location that the moon has not yet departed its aspect from Venus. So in other words, the moon in your location, hopefully, is not any further than 12 degrees of Taurus. Because if it is, that means that the moon's next aspect is to Saturn, which could show the action being somehow blocked or impeded, where you encounter a delay. If that's the case in your location, you might consider a Taurus rising, although Mars does become a little bit more problematic in that chart. Aries rising might be an even better choice if the moon is later in your location. You want the moon to still be applying to Venus. And that's going to do it for this week's elections. Thank you for joining Elections Weekly once again. As always, let me know any of these elections that you use and the results that you have in the comments below. Also, feel free to ask any questions that you have about electional astrology in the comments so that I can have a little Q&A session at the beginning of next episode. I'm currently in the process of acquiring better video equipment, so if you would like to help me out in doing that, please check out the PayPal link in the description. And thank you so much to everybody who's already contributed. I really, really appreciate it. And if you'd like for me to work on some elections for you personally and to personalize these charts with your natal chart and with what you've got going on, I'm also putting links to my electional services in the video description. So there's a lot of stuff down there. Just check it out. Thanks again, everybody, and I'll see you next week.